So welcome everyone, welcome to our webinar, Innovative Approaches to Community-Based Refugee Sponsorship, a Spotlight on Workplaces. My name is Tara Templin and I'm the Director of Innovation and Development at the University of Ottawa Refugee Hub. Hope everyone can hear me all right. Once in a while, we're in an old building and sometimes it rattles and shakes, so if you hear any of that noise, it's not an earthquake in Ottawa. So over the year, we've had the pleasure of engaging with workplaces together with our partners to discover and understand many successful examples of workplace sponsorships that have taken place across Canada, several of which were spearheaded by the discussants on this panel. To remind us all, the purpose of this webinar is to explore how to grow and sustain Canada's community-based refugee sponsorship program by sharing opportunities and lessons learned by workplaces in Canada who have sponsored refugees and or hired sponsored refugees. We hope through this knowledge exchange to be able to support the new employees and employers who are looking to sponsor refugees or hire sponsored refugees, which will help expand and enhance refugee inclusion and welcoming in Canada. But before we hear from our esteemed panelists, I would like to revisit how we are defining community and workplace-based sponsorship. So workplace refugee sponsorship, when you hear this term, it describes a form of sponsorship that occurs when the employees of a workplace form groups to help refugee newcomers settle and integrate into life in their new community. As in any sponsorship, sponsors commit to providing financial, emotional, and settlement supports for 1 year. Workplace sponsorship can range from a small, family-owned business supporting one family or one individual to a large company sponsoring hundreds of refugees. Workplaces are communities in their own right, and they can both facilitate and support sponsorship as well as become sites of refugee welcome and integration and possibly even employment. So there are significant benefits we see to undertaking workplace sponsorship, which would include enabling more refugees to find safety, expanding cultural understanding and intercultural communication, building leadership skills such as project management, group facilitation, budgeting, fundraising, and for some employers, benefits could include contributing to the corporate social responsibility strategy or employment engagement, and giving a sense of social purpose in the workplace. So while workplace sponsorship is undertaken for humanitarian purposes, it could also present an opportunity for employers, and that's what we've seen, to build a bridge with potential employees. So I will also say that now is a particularly urgent time when we are looking for workplaces to come forward as sponsors. As the Refugee Hub, we're looking to workplaces to engage in sponsorship in order to fill the 1,650 available resettlement spots through Canada's Blended Visa Office Referred Program. Specifically, we're looking to workplaces to form approximately 150 additional sponsorship groups needed to fill the available spaces. And we currently are managing a fund called the BBOR Fund, which is available to cover sponsorship costs if sponsor groups and workplaces apply before August 31st. So practically speaking, we're talking about two streams of workplace engagement. The first stream is sponsorship, which is how refugees arrive to Canada and are supported during their first year by groups of people from workplaces. This sponsorship is done for humanitarian purposes, and you'll hear examples of this today. Secondly, once people have arrived in Canada, they're looking for work, and you'll hear from people today about how workplaces can facilitate their employment. It may be you hire the person your workplace sponsored, but that is not a requirement. Maybe you hire someone that another workplace sponsored, but the choice is yours. Now I'm privileged and very pleased to have the privilege to introduce our speakers of this webinar, who, in addition to their many other accomplishments, which would take the entire hour to list, have both personal and professional experience with refugee sponsorship in the workplace. So our speakers include Wendy Cukier, who's the director of the Diversity Institute and a professor at Ryerson University. Mark Patterson, who's the executive director of Magnet and Hire Immigrants. Mohamad, who's the president and CEO of Paramount Fine Foods. Kristine Remedios, the chief inclusion and social impact officer at KPMG, who will speak about their sponsorships. And Louis Century, last but certainly not least, a lawyer at Goldblatt Partners. So just one note on housekeeping. So as you will know, as participants, all of your mics are muted, but please, we welcome your input into the questions on the chat box, and we'll have approximately 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the discussion, at the end of the presentation to have a discussion and a question and answer session. And because I know the content is very engaging, it's my bread and butter, it's what I'm super interested in, and I want to leave time for the question and answers, so I'm going to be quite strict with the discussants, and I will ask their forgiveness later, so you will see that. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Wendy Cukier, who is going to talk to us more about the Ryerson University Lifeline Syria Network. So. Wendy, are you able to see your presentation?
Yes.
Wonderful.
Great. So I'd like the next slide, please. Just to build on what Tara mentioned, the Syrian refugee crisis was considered the greatest humanitarian crisis in the last century. I think I need a new slide. Can we get the next slide? Are you recording it or are we? There, great. I don't want to talk about this in detail because I know that people on the phone are familiar with this, but in the overall scheme of things, Canada's commitment was actually relatively small compared to many other countries in Europe, for example. The highest per capita influx of Syrian refugees was actually in Sweden, and we all know about Germany. And as most of you know, there are three ways that refugees came to Canada: government-assisted refugees, privately sponsored refugees, and blended visa office referrals, or the BVOR class refugees, which Tara referred to. The Ryerson University Lifeline Syria Challenge really applied to the privately sponsored refugees as well as some BVORs. If I may have the next slide. Sorry. So I was part of a group that created something called Lifeline Syria, which was led by Senator Ratna Omadvar before she was a senator. And many of the people who came together to create Lifeline Syria had previously worked with Operation Lifeline, which in 1979-80 had helped privately sponsor 60,000 Indo-Chinese refugees. And in fact, at that time, I led a sponsorship group and sponsored a Vietnamese family. We launched Lifeline Syria June 17th, 2015. And there was media coverage. And later that day, I emailed the president of Ryerson at the time, Sheldon Levy, to tell him that we had launched Lifeline Syria. And his response was, "What's Ryerson going to do?" And within a couple of minutes, I responded and said, "Oh, well, Ryerson leaders can lead sponsorship teams. Let's set a target of 10. You can lead a team, I can lead a team. We can recruit other partners, and all of us can commit $5,000 and then raise the other $22,000 needed in order to meet the requirements." And within an hour, we had created the Lifeline Syria Challenge, the Ryerson University Lifeline Syria Challenge, which we launched a month later, and we had 10 sponsorship groups formed, actually 11, and we'd committed to sponsoring 40,000 Syrian refugees at Ryerson, drawing together Ryerson faculty and staff, Ryerson partners, as well as engaging our students, if I can have the next slide. And that was one of the big innovations, was having been a sponsor, I recognized that there are people with money and there are people with time, and they're not necessarily the same people. So the idea was we create opportunities for our students to get actively engaged as volunteers, working in a variety of capacities in order to support the sponsors who were putting up the money. And we had business students helping with financial literacy. We had nursing students helping with medical applications. We had lots of people helping to find housing and so on. Then what happened was the picture of Alan Kurdi hit the newspapers at the beginning of September. And so the Ryerson University Lifeline Syria Challenge was operating. We had a website, we had people in place, and suddenly there was a massive outpouring of Canadians who wanted to get involved. At that point, Sarah Diamond, who's the president of OCADU, contacted me and said, rather than the other universities in the Toronto area doing their own thing, she wanted to bring them into the Ryerson University Lifeline Syria Challenge. She did that. We had U of T, we had York, we had OCADU. And instead of our initial target of 10 sponsored families, we end up sponsoring over 100. We resettled 400 Syrian refugees. We raised $5 million, and we engaged more than 1,000 volunteers in the activity, including many of our partners. So KPMG was Ryerson's auditor, and you'll hear more about their work with us on this project. I would just close in saying that the benefits of the project were far beyond what we saw in terms of the actual sponsorship of the individual refugees. In fact, many of the sponsors would say they got more out of it than the family that they sponsored did. The kind of engagement that we had, the kind of social capital that Syrian refugees arrived with, allowed them to be far more successful, whether it was integrating in school, whether it was finding employment, or whether it was becoming part of Canadian society. And so from our perspective, this model has enormous benefits, not just, as I said, to the people who are being sponsored, but to the sponsors themselves. The kind of engagement of the Ryerson community, the U of T community, the experience that our students got and so on was immeasurable. And if we look beyond that to Canada generally, what you will see, if you can go to the next slide, what we saw was an incredibly diverse set of organizations stepping up in a variety of ways. And if you can go to the final slide, I will also say that fighting racism and Islamophobia requires more than arguments about human rights and equity. It requires personal connections with people. And in my view, the strongest antidote to racism and Islamophobia is projects like the private sponsorship of refugees, because it gives people real opportunities to engage with each other, to meet, and to build understanding. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Wendy. That was very insightful, and I appreciate the overview of the huge Ryerson University Lifeline Syria Challenge. We're going to move now to Mark Patterson, who's the Executive Director of Magnet and Hire Immigrants, who will speak about how workplaces, in particular, can engage in hiring sponsored refugees. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Tara. It's great to be on the call with all of the other panelists, and thanks for joining us today. So again, Tara mentioned I'm the Executive Director of Magnet, and its subsidiary program, Hire Immigrants, We've been working on developing some of the digital infrastructure, digital platforms to help connect employers with resources and best practices, support them in integrating newcomers into their workforce. Hire Immigrants is actually also the organizer of the Refugee Roundtable, which is convened by and chaired by Senator Ratnamabar. The goal of the roundtable is to support connecting refugees to meaningful employment opportunities. And we achieve this through engaging private and public sector employers and creating initiatives for employers to either directly hire refugees to meet their employment needs or to indirectly support refugees. The BVOR program is an example of how employers can obviously get involved, and we'll hear more about that from Tara. If you're interested in joining the roundtable as well, you can connect with us at hireimmigrants@ryerson.ca. That's the email address, hireimmigrants, all one word, @ryerson.ca. And we have a few exciting initiatives planned for the fall, so please reach out to us and stay in touch. I won't get too much into more detail. I was privileged to have two amazing mentors in my life, Wendy and who's you've just heard speak, as well as Senator Ratnamabar, and was very involved in watching them as they brought together all of the initiatives around Syrian, Ryerson Refugee Lifeline Syria response, and was also privileged to work directly in a lot of workshops and directly supporting some of the refugees and transitioning into meaningful employment. So we've done a number of where we've really focused is on creating the digital infrastructure to be able to scale responses to shocks to the system like this, to help employers connect more quickly to the talent that is available, and to ensure that refugees are able to integrate quickly into the workplace. So excited to be on the panel with employers like Mohamad, who you're going to hear from, and others that have had such an impact. And I think that's critically important. I'd only just close by picking up on one thing that Wendy said, as I was also I think it's really the personal experience, and spoken recently to a number of people on this, and to people in my family and others that I have in even my personal connections across the country is ensuring that people have personal connections. At the end of the day, we all have the same struggles, fears, stresses. We're trying to raise our families and have a meaningful place in society, and I think having support for refugees in your employment, in your workplace, and engaging, whether it's through private sponsorship or workplace sponsorship, is really critical and important. And so happy to be part of the panel. I'll leave my comments there for now, and hopefully be engaged more in discussion.
Great. Thank you very much, Mark. I appreciate your comments, and it's exciting to see the digital platform that's been developed through Magnet to connect employers and community organizations, and obviously immigrant newcomers who are looking for employment. So we're going to pass the theoretical mic over to Mohamad Fakih, again, the president and CEO of Paramount Fine Foods, who's really been a trailblazer in this field, and who can speak to us about his personal and professional support of refugees. And I'm hoping, including most recently, his collaboration with Talent Beyond Boundaries, which definitely falls outside of the Canadian private sponsorship program, but which I think is an interesting experience to share, that also highlights what can happen with refugee employment. Over to you, Mohamad.
Well, hello everyone, and thank you very much, Wendy and Mark, for all your help. They taught me and taught my company how to start this and work together, because us, like every other company, we wanted to help. We didn't know how to deal with it at the time. It was something new to us. But what wasn't new for me, I had been a refugee myself a couple times during my lifetime in the war of Lebanon, and I had left my house, my school, and everything as a kid. And even growing up, I grew up as a refugee until I left to Italy to study, and then I immigrated to Canada. So what wasn't new for me is the idea of me having and wanting to help and welcome refugee. It's a great important step, was a great way for me to pay it forward. And not only that, I proved it myself firsthand that it's the profitable thing to do. Because when you help a refugee, we all show that we are a progressive country, and it's profitable for your company, it's better for your country. And that's me. I'm an example. I arrived here with $1,200, and today we run a company of 2,500 employees, 150 Syrian refugees hired, and many more worldwide than the 150 in Canada. And I'm a refugee, so the people that helped me here, they built a legacy. Yes, maybe you can call me trailblazer, thank you. But it's an example. When you hire one person, you're not only hiring or helping one, you're helping every single one that person will help. And you're setting an example for everyone else to do it. And during all this, looking at Canadians, that normal, regular people, men and women, putting up their own money, taking time out of their life to help people that they've never met, it's an amazing example. But welcoming refugee is a very important step, but it's only a step. It's a first step. People, if they don't find work, what are they to think of our country? And what would the people of this country will think of them? And I witnessed that firsthand. So I need to really always repeat the same thing. A job for a refugee is everything. It's the way to earn money, yes. It's a gesture of goodwill, but it's a vote as well for their confidence, it's a pathway to their financial independence, and restores their self-respect and their family together. It's simply everything. So yes, welcoming them is important, but every time, any study showed that hiring and finding an employment is the most important factor of welcoming refugees for any refugee that we have interviewed. So I know what it is to be a refugee. So I have seen many who struggle with adversity because not everybody is welcoming. People were challenged to find work, to prove themselves, having their certification or their whatever they studies or even recognized here, even the language. So I think a very big step to find a job that hopefully, and I'm using every time I'm on an interview or panel like this, hopefully all employers will catch up with the government of being as welcoming and tap to on these talents, like talent beyond boundaries, what we just did with Paramount. So employers need to understand, and they need honestly to even admit, we all have a problem and we struggle to find talents. But we find it bureaucratically difficult to tap into the refugee programs. And I can tell you as an employer, this is false. It's very easy, and it costed me nothing to tap on talent beyond boundaries. And even the lawyers that did the paperwork, they did it pro bono. So for anyone that wants to help their own company before helping those refugees, there is a way to do it. And it's an important way because, again, you're changing a life, but most importantly, you're making your company better. You're making your own employees and your talents wanting to stay with your company, because today's bottom line has a change in companies. People need a company with purpose. Purpose because people want to work for a company that has more than just money, that does good things into the community. So it attracts talent when you help the community and when you help refugees. It does attract more customers. So customers tend to come more often at Paramount to support a company that does well for the community. So it is the profitable thing to do. And you're not doing the refugee a favor, you're helping them. Refugees don't become a thing. They remain a human. What happened to them, their circumstances have changed with no control from their own hands. And it's on us all to help them. And by helping them is the most important to find them a job. So that's how we did it. So I went to Lebanon. As you know, I work with UNHCR very closely. I visited the camps, but I met with Talent Beyond Boundaries. And we spoke about several programs of how can we bring talent, Syrian refugee talent, or any refugee talented to come to Canada and to work with Paramount to help us as well. And we started the process. And was very simple, costed us nothing. And a couple of days ago, we welcomed an amazing, beautiful family from Syria that they have gone to Lebanon in a camp, then to Iraq, and from there they came to Canada. Our team were so excited. Part of our members were crying on the airport, just welcoming them. Worked very hard before their arrival, found homes for them, an apartment for them. I had a dinner with my family and the chef's family on Sunday with a group of my team. Part of the members of my team members' family called me and said, "Thank you very much for having Magda and Samantha going through this." They didn't stop talking about it. And now we're thinking to do the same as well in our business where we work. So it's a great example where we all need to really look at the mirror and say, if we want to help, we can help, and it's not going to cost us anything. And if we want to do the right thing for our business, from a businessman to every single entrepreneur in this country, hiring a refugee is the profitable thing to do. I can prove it. I can prove it in numbers and in financial statements. And we're lucky today that we have so many great organizations to help us doing that. Too many lawyers that they know how to do it. Ryerson, Lifeline Syria, Magna, everybody. Today it's easier because we know it how. It's all about them decide to think outside the box. And that's what we are, entrepreneur. Well, that's what we do every day as people in business. So when you hire a refugee, you're adding purpose to your organization, and definitely your customer will support more. So it's economically the right thing to do. You allow a refugee to contribute to Canada's success. Morally is the right thing to do. You give helping hand the people that need it the most to restore their dignity and the dignity of work. Trust me, again, I'm going to say it, a refugee will never forget the first person ever to give them a break and offer them a job, because it shows that you're telling them that they have value. And that's what I felt myself when people smiled at me. When Canadians used to smile to me, I felt included. So I hope everyone listen and hear what I said and understand the importance of helping, partnering with a lot of the organizations available. The government programs now are available to help to make it easier. So employers, it's very easy to tap on finding those talent, and it's a legacy. It's a legacy for any company to hire refugees, and it's a legacy that anyone should be proud of. Like the people who helped me, I'm hoping that they are proud of helping me when I came here with nothing, and now that they see me trying to do good work with the community. So hiring a refugee is an investment in that person, but it's an investment in your own company, in your own people, in your family, and in your country. And most importantly, in the entire world, that need to remember that those people have done nothing wrong, and those circumstances were not something that they caused. We all could be a refugee one day, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's all about an opportunity that we will get in touch again with our hearts and help them. But it's not, again, I need to insist on this and I will end here. It's not a favor to the refugees. It's actually a favor to ourselves that we're doing, because it will make us better and more as a progressive country. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mohamad. That was very inspiring to me, and to hear that you had hired 150 Syrian refugees is really incredible. So thank you very much. And I think what you're talking about and what you're illustrating is changing the narrative around refugees, both through employment, but then we can do the same thing through sponsorship, which really is engaging our communities in the settlement and integration process. So thank you again, and we're going to pass the microphone to Kristine Remedios, the Chief Inclusion and Social Impact Officer at KPMG. And she's going to speak about how KPMG's sponsorship, for example, those that were spearheaded by their Calgary and Winnipeg offices, align with KPMG's corporate social responsibility and diversity and inclusion strategies. So over to you, Kristine.
Great, thank you, Tara. So Just to start off, just to give a little bit of background on the firm for those of you who are not familiar. So KPMG, we're a global firm. In Canada here, we have just over 7,000 employees. And what we do is we provide kind of professional services, consulting services around digital technology, audit, tax, to different industry groups and organizations. I myself, I am the Chief Inclusion, Diversity and Social Impact Officer for the firm, and am quite proud to, number one, work for an organization that supports diverse communities. But on a more personal note, you know, I came in the early 70s to Canada with my family as a refugee. So to be in this position and be able to kind of give back on a different scale is very personal for me. So, you know, again, just proud to work for an organization that supports refugees. This also, as you could then see then, that our firm, you know, highly values getting involved in the Canadian community and also getting our people involved. So what I wanted to do today is just really share with you how KPMG was involved in the Ryerson University Lifeline Syria Challenge, and do this more, I guess, at a high level and from an employer perspective. And then in the meantime, I think, Tara, you and I have talked quite a bit about how KPMG could maybe put some best practices in a more detailed kind of document together that we could distribute more broadly to help other organizations kind of do something similar. But what I thought I would do today is just talk to you about the process we went through internally and what that meant to us, and really what was involved in what became kind of a one-year commitment for our people and for the firm at that time. So, you know, really for our organization, this all started, you know, by one of our senior partners. We had a lot of employees already kind of coming forward to say, is KPMG getting involved? How can we get involved in supporting refugees? And one of our senior partners actually, you know, had a conversation with Senator Ratna Omnivar about how can we collaborate, how can we get connected with this challenge, and how can we support this initiative. And it was really just a matter of this senior partner then going to our CEO, going to our senior leadership team, and getting a commitment from them, which was the easy part of this whole process, quite frankly. I mean, that all happened very quickly. From there, really within our organization, just to kind of paint a picture of what this kind of looked like at a very high level, is our CEO then really went out to our firm across Canada and to our people and said, who wants to get involved? Like, who wants to get involved in this corporate challenge? We invited people to come forward who had a passion, who had an interest, who were able to commit to kind of a one-year long initiative. And after we did that call out, we had a great response internally and across the country. So this wasn't just happening in Toronto, this was happening across our different offices. We then brought all of these people who had put up their hand together on a webinar for about an hour, and really just went through why we thought this was important, how we wanted to engage them, what the opportunities would be, whether they wanted to give their time through volunteering, whether they wanted to give in-kind support, whether they wanted to give financial support. So we really offered them various opportunities so that it was inclusive of everybody in the firm. So to Wendy's point, for those that could just get involved from a financial, that was what they did. For those who wanted to give their time, that was what they did. And so from there, all the kind of great details and mechanics of this all came to be in terms of how we were going to get involved and how we were going to partner with Ryerson. So what this meant to us was something very organized, and because it became so organized, it kind of made it very streamlined and then easy to kind of execute on. We set up sponsorship teams across the country. We had multiple teams in each location. We defined what each of those teams were going to be made up of. Typically, they were 10 to 12 people across different levels in the organization. So this was great opportunity to kind of bring our partners together with our people in a very different way than they are used to and outside of their typical day-to-day. Everybody had a role on those teams. It was that specific. So did you want to get involved in housing? Did you want to get involved in helping resettle from an education perspective, from helping with the healthcare system? Did you speak Arabic, and do you want to be involved in the actual communication with the family and help and support from that perspective? So each team kind of had this makeup of individuals that had very specific roles. We had a team lead, and that team lead was the communication vehicle with Ryerson. And on the Ryerson side, they helped us with matching of us with the family, bringing student volunteers to help support us, helped with the financial distributions as we needed them. So it became a really nice kind of collaboration between us and between Ryerson. The details and the complexity were all in that resettlement in terms of housing, education, health. But we tried to streamline that as much as we could. And I think at the end of the day, you know, this collaboration for us, so where we ended up with is we had over 150 people across the country that were engaged in our firm. We ended up sponsoring 10 families within that year coming into Canada. And, you know, it was just, it's hard to kind of speak to the experience and what this brought to our people, because it's so, it's just so deep in terms of the experience it gave to them. But it was a great opportunity for us as a firm to get our people involved in such a different way in terms of collaboration, in terms of just personally being engaged with those families. A lot of our people are still engaged with those families today. They interact with them on a social perspective. So there's that connection that I think, you know, Mohamad had said that, like it's that connection that will always be there. And so for us, you know, if I were to take a step back and just talk about us as an employer and me being in the social impact role within the firm, you know, our people across the country get to volunteer. We support them in volunteerism all the time. They get to do that on an individual basis in the locations in which they reside. What was different about this is this wasn't about them as an individual. This was about us kind of as a collective firm kind of giving back and just collaborating and working together. And so what I'm trying to bring you is what the benefits are of it, doing it from an employer perspective, right? In terms of all that value that that was brought to our people, and it's memorable, and it's something they keep talking about, and it's something that our people will get involved in again. So this was really, I mean, I won't go through, this is as much detail as I think I'll give you, because there's a lot of kind of behind the scenes. But I think, you know, from an employer perspective, I absolutely will be happy to share more detailed best practices. And this is something that I know our firm was very proud to be involved in. And we thank Ryerson, and we thank you, Wendy, and we thank, you know, Senator Ratna Amnavar for engaging us in this and allowing us to kind of partner with you on this.
Thank you, Kristine. I really appreciate the bird's eye view of a corporate sponsorship, and it sounds very straightforward. And there's obviously huge benefits to all of the communities and employees who are involved. But I imagine that, you know, the planning that took place was quite intricate, and really look forward to working with you on best practices and making sure that all of those workplaces that are interested in getting involved in sponsorship are able to do that, benefiting from KPMG's experience. So I'm gonna pass the mic to Louis Century. So Louis is a lawyer at Goldblatt Partners, who spearheaded, together with partners in the firm and various employees at the firm, a workplace sponsorship that also saw former clients, retired partners, and staff in a variety of positions come forward to become part of the sponsorship group. So over to you, Louis.
Thanks so much. And I've been sitting here listening to the remarks of all these incredible panelists, and I'm humbled to be in their company and inspired, and what larger organizations like Ryerson and KPMG and Paramount have done and continue to do is really incredible. And I can't possibly even pretend to fill those large shoes. So I think what my role is, or how I view my role, is to give different kind of a model that's a little more accessible to, let's say, a smaller business or you know, a smaller group of employees, and how a sponsorship might look if you're kind of on the more micro level. I work at a law firm. We're kind of 40 to 50 lawyers in downtown Toronto, and we practice labor and employment and general litigation. And I guess common with some of the other stories, our involvement began in the summer of 2015, and kind of a few months before, around the time that Lifeline Syria was coming into existence. And, you know, we started to have just discussions, and I knew some of the folks involved in Lifeline Syria, and we just started to talk and think, well, you know, this was before the photo of Alan Kurdi and before really that incredible moment when everything changed and there were tens of thousands of resettlements. And we thought back to the original Operation Lifeline, and, you know, myself, I'm like, you know, I was skeptical that anything like that could be replicated. But we thought, well, if anything is good, if we're ever going to do anything like that before, we're going to have workplaces involved in some way. And speaking for myself, I mean, you know, I work long hours, and my workplace really is my community. It's a little sad to admit. But, you know, I'm here. I love my job. I love my colleagues, and this is really a big part of my community. I don't have a religious community that I go to, and I know the churches and so on were a big part of Operation Lifeline back in the 70s. And so we thought, okay, well, let's focus on where we spend our lives. And that's what started those conversations in my firm and in so many other firms and businesses across the country. And then, you know, when I planted some seeds and started sending emails, and, you know, we can do this, we can sponsor a family. It's not that complicated, but it, you know, I don't want to say it fell on deaf ears, but it was really only when that photograph of, the tragic photograph of Alan Kurdi was published, and then suddenly, you know, as you all remember, everyone wanted to do something. And so in that moment, it kind of mobilized us and so many others. And I guess you could say the rest is history, and our firm kind of came together, and you know, a lot of what was said about KPMG really resonates personally. It was really an extraordinary couple of years within our firm, you know, with lawyers of all different seniority and support staff and family and clients and friends all just kind of working together. Myself, I can say personally, like, you know, I work in my own little subgroup within the firm and deal with the same people. And through this sponsorship, I, you know, developed these relationships just across the whole organization and collaborating, and never really experienced anything like that within my organization, you know, then or since. And the family has arrived, and like others have said, we obviously maintain very close personal relationships with them. So I guess I thought I just have 7 quick points that I wrote down. I don't have any slides for you, but I'll try to be brief. And this is just my attempt to kind of take away some quick themes in terms of trying to replicate this idea of workplace sponsorship, and you know, maybe tips for others who are looking to mobilize their own workplaces, strategies of what might work, and challenges to overcome. So the first has been discussed: workplace as community. And that's just the basic idea of really encouraging everyone to think about workplace as hub of community. It's not the way we always have traditionally thought about work, but you know, increasingly, I think that's essential if we're going to have a larger, you know, mass movements around this, like we did a few years ago. Workplaces are going to have to be a part of that. The second is timing matters. And I don't know how we'll ever replicate the mobilization that happened in 2015, 2016, but I think it has to be part of our thinking in terms of strategy, because it really was that moment that allowed for scaling up across the country and within my own organization. And so I don't know how you replicate those, you know, conditions, but I think it's part of it. And when you're looking to mobilize your own workplace, I think having an eye to when there is a critical moment in terms of the public conversation, frankly, we might be in one of those moments now with what's happening in the United States right now. And just reading earlier today, Donald Trump talking about trying to reduce refugee intake in Europe. So those sorts of conversations may create the opportunity to engage folks within your organization. The third is, I call it support from leadership, but not top down. And again, the remarks about KPMG really resonated here because, you know, I was just a lowly associate in my firm when I pitched this to the firm, but it couldn't have happened without buy-in from the very top. That being said, it can't just be a top-down initiative. Partners can't do this on their own. You really need folks throughout and across the organization willing to put in the time. Fourth is team building, and I've talked about that. It created really a special time for our organization, and I think really strengthened a lot of bonds within the organization, you know, separate and aside from the value of the sponsorship itself. It you know, had a lot of benefits in kind of organization building for our firm. The fifth is client development, and I don't mean to be crass about this. You know, obviously this isn't just a business initiative, but it is a part of the picture. And, you know, our law firm doing this sponsorship really was a way to engage with our broader business community and clients. And, you know, the old, you know, take clients to the golf course and so on, like just ways to engage with your customers and your clients. And so having a refugee sponsored project was just such a more interesting and engaging way to be with clients, and you know, many clients volunteered as part of various committees in support of the sponsorship. The sixth is different business models, and that's just to emphasize that there's really no one size fits all. I mean, KPMG really exemplifies that, that there's all different ways that people can be involved, and an organization could just financially support a sponsorship. It could hire refugees like Mohamad is trailblazing. Or it could organize a kind of institutional private sponsorship like our firm did, and kind of have it as part of an officially sanctioned sponsorship within the firm. So I don't, you know, it might be that models that are discussed here don't immediately translate to your organization, but there's all different ways that I think organizations can do this work. And then finally is critical mass, and you know, just reflecting to the incredible period in 2015-16 when you saw, you know, hundreds and hundreds of businesses across the country all being engaged. And I just think we need to keep thinking about that special time and think about how we're ever going to replicate that. And you know, I just think workplaces and businesses are one way or another are going to have to be a part of you know, of that movement if we're ever going to achieve something similar again. Thanks so much. Sorry if I went over time.
Thanks so much, Louis. You're forgiven. That was very insightful, and I really appreciate your points on how to recreate the opportunity to sponsor and to mobilize and to build sponsorship groups at scale. And so I can't miss the opportunity to also put a plug in for the Refugee Hub's BWAR Fund. So if there was ever a time to mobilize your workplace, now is the time when you can have your sponsorship financial responsibilities covered by the fund that's available. So please talk to us at the Refugee Hub if you're interested in that. I'd like to go ahead and start taking some audience questions, and thank you again to all of our panelists for their contributions. I really found that quite interesting and insightful, particularly the diversity of perspectives. So one of the questions we have is whether or not it is illegal to hire those immigrants that you sponsor if you are sponsoring through BVOR as a corporate sponsor. And the answer to that is no, it is not illegal. But let's to be fair, it is very sensitive. So and we should always take into account power dynamics. If if you are a sponsor, and there's power dynamics, of course, in any sponsorship, but particularly those power dynamics can be amplified if you are sponsoring in a workplace and that person that you're sponsoring is then moved into a colleague or an employee or a subordinate role within your workplace. So I won't go into too much detail there, but no, it's not illegal. And yes, there are many, many considerations to think through very carefully before hiring. And but that isn't to say that it should never happen. In fact, we know from Mohamad that you know, this is crucial to integration. So another question we have, one second here. So how are we making communities and the societies aware of your initiatives? That's a really good question, and maybe I would pass it over to Mohamad to speak to how is he speaking and how is he helping promote the refugee employment and refugee sponsorship that you're engaged in.
Well, thank you very much for the question, and thank you very much for all the panelists. Amazing, amazing conversation. I think it's very simple. I think we're all, I think, guilty of not telling more success stories of immigrants and refugees. If we tell more success stories of integrating refugees into our workplace, then other employers will be more, basically less scared and understand that it's not that complicated and it's not that costly, because businesses are tight with number on their bottom line today. And when other entrepreneurs start telling these stories, how it did not cost them a lot, how it actually added to their work environment a lot of more working together, and a great moment, like Louis said, that the team will always remember. When we did the homeless initiative in Toronto, I had a call from one of the executive of a big coffee company in the city. And he said, I want to work for this company. And I said, you want to work for Paramount? You work for a much bigger company. He said, my mom called me and said, you need to work for companies that does well in the community. So when we tell more of these stories, and when we CEOs address other CEOs or anyone with the authority of hiring, how easy and how better these staff are, because they come here and they're very loyal. They're very eager to do above and beyond what's asked of them. They're very resilient, persistent to succeed, because their job is everything for them, to the extreme that they actually outperform a lot of other workers. Or they will actually bridge the gap of learning faster than we ever expect, and you'll have in your hand the great talent and a great example to set to the rest of the world. So we need to tell more of the success stories of refugees, and we need to talk and address more of the private sector and tell them how easy it is. We had a dinner with a lot of CEOs, and the questions that those CEOs were asking me were really simple to answer, simple to resolve, but they felt that they're so far from being able to make a decision to commit to hiring refugees. Sometimes the solutions are much closer to us than what we think, but it's on us, the people who believed in hiring refugees, who are refugees themselves like me. It's on us to tell more of these success stories. And people like KPMG and the stories that she said, that how their team were involved. And yeah, some people want only to pay money, but because they haven't tasted it, how beautiful is that experience of doing more than money. So I would pull them more into it. I'll invite them more to do more. And I do that every day as well on Twitter. A lot of people say, oh, you tweet about it because you want to show off maybe about it. Not a lot of people say that, but some people do. But no, we need to tell those success stories. And by tweeting and by telling people those stories and by putting it on social media platforms, yeah, maybe we get the world to know that we do something good. But most importantly, maybe we'll help one more refugee to be hired. One single family, like the new chef that we brought, 2 children an amazing wife that she's going to work for Paramount as well. So now you did one sponsorship, but you got 4 people out of their circumstances to come to Canada to build a better life. It's a great legacy for anyone to be proud of. And I think we should tell more of those stories.
Thank you, Mohamad. And I might just ask Kristine at KPMG to jump in and talk a little bit about how she shared and how KPMG shared the work that they were doing sponsoring across the country.
Yeah, Tara, I was actually going to jump in because, you know, that the comment, Mohamad, that you just made about, you know, having conversations with CEOs and business leaders and them wanting to get engaged, but feeling it's out of reach or they can't do something. You know, I think, you know, there's a lot of research out there that says a lot of organizations, that's what holds them back, is that they hear about these opportunities, but think it's so out of reach that how can they even get involved? And I think from an employer perspective, it's the same for employees. Like we heard from our employees saying, you know, are we going to do something? What is that? Like they weren't sure what it was, but they knew they wanted to get engaged. And by us actually going out to them and giving them the opportunity, you will be pleasantly surprised at how many people will step up when the opportunity is in front of them to get engaged. And the fact that we were able to give them the opportunity in multiple ways that felt right for them, whether it was financial, whether it was volunteer time, I think that was very important for us. In terms of getting it out externally, I mean, I think, you know, I think right now, I think what we had done was a lot of more internal focus, and what we're trying to do now as part of my role is that it doesn't just stop there with one big project or initiative, right? So we're involved in hosting the roundtable that Hire Immigrants talked about. We're involved as a firm in terms of making a commitment to other organizations to kind of help with refugees. And I think we just need to be out there more talking about this openly and not being afraid of these discussions that people are going to get upset or offended or hurt. I think we just need to move forward for those of us that know how important this is and just, you know, be role models and not be afraid to talk about it more. We could have talked about it more. I think we should talk about it more openly as a firm. So, yeah. Great.
Thank you, Kristine. We have a question here about finding a list of employers who are sponsoring refugees, and that's a great question, and I wish it existed. Thankfully, RSTP, Refugee Sponsorship Training Program, has a couple examples on their website and some excellent videos of workplaces who have sponsored. But I hope through engaging with organizations like Tent, like the B team, that we'll eventually be able to have a list of refugees. We also have a question about can a settlement agency with IRCC, with Government of Canada funding, do workplace sponsorship? And if so, will there be ethical issues or conflict, since the organization or agencies are service providers for refugees and immigrants? And I will say that we have knowledge of several examples of settlement agencies who have formed sponsorship groups. And I think it's up to each individual to examine whether or not they have ethical issues themselves. If, for example, they're spending a large portion of their day already supporting refugees, do they have the time to do justice to their sponsorship responsibilities? But it is certainly possible if, for example, IRCC employees themselves were sponsoring, they would definitely need to examine their professional responsibilities, and if they were implicated in any sort of decision making around status, they would probably not want to sponsor because of conflict of interest. So just looking through here, I just want to ask one question here that says, let's talk about a couple of the challenges and risks that could be and should be addressed when a workplace takes on sponsorship. So I'm wondering, Louis, could you answer that one to begin with?
Challenges and risks. I mean, I think Mohamad said something, you know, when earlier about when folks are, I think he was talking to CEOs and they're asking all these questions, and he says, you know, sometimes it's simpler than it seems. The solution is easier than it seems. And sure enough, you know, in our case, you know, the partners had all sorts of questions about liability and so on. And, you know, the long and the short of it is it's a tried and tested model. And, you know, there are answers to any kind of legal liability questions you might have. And there's workarounds and there's solutions, and there's always a way to kind of get it done. So, I mean, there's challenges that are, you know, present in any refugee sponsorship in welcoming a family to this country and supporting them. And, you know, suggesting that it's kind of all gravy and easy is like, you know, people are lying to you. It's really hard, and it's emotionally challenging, and it's trying on, you know, various people involved. But I mean, that's also part of the reward. So, because the relationships that come out of it are just, you know, so enriching. So I'm sorry it was a bit of a vague answer, but like, you know, you'll figure it out is my answer.
That's great. Thank you, Louis. Well, we're already over time, so there's a lot of excellent questions that we could ask and have a further discussion, which I hope we'll be able to do in the future.
If you don't mind, sorry.
Go
I'm just
ahead,
going to wait
Mohamad.
for one
Yes.
second. Yeah, I'm sorry. I know Louis is trying to take the legal route of it, which is rightfully so. He's a lawyer. But I need to really tell everyone, as a refugees, when they come here for work, to work in companies, I don't think there is any risk more than the same equivalent risk of hiring anyone Canadian. There is definitely, like the Greek, they say, we suffer our way to wisdom. Definitely, there is some challenges on their language, but it will outweigh like that, how much they will go above and beyond what's asked of them, and the loyalty to the company that gave them the first job. So maybe there is an upfront little bit more of a training. But again, one more time, what KPMG did, what IKEA did, what Starbucks did, a lot of the companies that actually worked with us with Tent Foundation and the Fakih Foundation to make this easier to help refugees, we now have all, including Lifeline Syria and Magna, a lot of programs, how to deal with them and to make them less will make less problematic hiring them. And definitely the legal risk, a lot of lawyers are helping pro bono, including Louis and his firm and a lot of other firms. But definitely it is the profitable thing to do. Definitely it's very easy and it's doable. And it's like a charity. When you want to give, there is no excuses why you will not give. When you want to help, there is no excuses why you would not be able to help, except you really wanting to do it. Because even when you want to give in charity, you don't have the money, you give your time. And same thing for refugee. You don't have the money, you can teach them Canada. You can teach them the language. You can teach them about Canadian. You can help them to do other things. So definitely it is doable, definitely is easy, and definitely is the right thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohamad. That's very important. And there's an urgency for people to come forward to sponsor, and an urgency for people to hire those newcomer refugees who've arrived. So thank you for that. And I want to just mention another huge thank you to Wendy, to Mark, to Mohamad, Kristine, and Louis for sharing their expertise and their experience with us, as well as to the audience who've stayed at their computers on a bright, sunny, summer, sticky day, at least in Ottawa, and on a Friday afternoon nonetheless. So I really appreciate your participation. And I look forward to continuing the conversation on workplace sponsorship and seeing how it evolves as more workplaces come forward to welcome refugees. So thank you, and have a wonderful afternoon and a wonderful weekend. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.